The words cut through me like a serrated knife. "You've been useless your whole life," my son-in-law Bradley muttered, not realizing I was within earshot. I froze in the hallway of my daughter's suburban Boston home, my hand gripping the door frame until my knuckles turned white. The familiar ache in my lower back, a souvenir from 40 years of construction work, suddenly intensified. "I mean, what has he ever accomplished?" Bradley continued, his voice carrying from the kitchen where he thought he was alone with my daughter Emma, living in that same dumpy house for 30 years, working the same blue-collar job until he got too old. And now he expects us to take care of him? To what? Support him while he burns through whatever pittance of savings he managed to scrape together? I should have walked away, should have turned and slipped back out the front door, but my feet were rooted to the spot, my heart hammering against my ribs as I waited for my daughter's response, waited for her to defend me, to remind him of the sacrifices I'd made, the double shifts I'd worked to put her through college, the second mortgage I'd taken out to help with their down payment on this very house with its gleaming hardwood floors and granite countertops. "Brad, keep your voice down," Emma hissed. "Not a defense. Just concern about being overheard. We talked about this. It's just until he gets back on his feet. The medical bills from Mom's cancer wiped him out. You know that. It's been 2 years since Martha died," Bradley said, his voice dripping with contempt. "And he's been spiraling ever since. The drinking, the depression, quitting his job at Wilson Construction when they wanted to move him to a desk position. He's choosing to be a burden, Emma, and I'm tired of carrying dead weight. Dead weight. Is that what I'd become? At 62, was I nothing more than a burden to be carried? An obligation to be endured? I'd lost Martha, my wife of 38 years, to pancreatic cancer, watched her wither away despite second mortgages and refinanced loans to pay for experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. I drained every penny of our retirement savings trying to save her, and when I couldn't, when she slipped away despite everything, I'd fallen apart. But I wasn't dead weight. Not anymore. Not since Richard Wilson had called me 3 weeks ago. "Frank," he'd said, "I need you back. Not swinging hammers, but running things. My nephew Bradley's a disaster as project manager. Clients are complaining. Contracts are being lost. I need someone who knows the business from the foundation up." I hadn't given Richard an answer yet. Wasn't sure I was ready. But hearing Bradley, learning exactly what my son-in-law thought of me, suddenly made everything crystalline clear. "And now he's talking about going back to work," Bradley scoffed. "Like anyone would hire a washed-up old man with outdated skills. It's pathetic, honestly." "He's trying." "Brad," Emma said softly. So softly I almost missed it. "Dad's been through a lot. We've all been through a lot," Bradley snapped. "The difference is the rest of us don't use it as an excuse to give up on life. Your father's been useless his whole life, Emma. A blue-collar nobody who never amounted to anything. And now he wants to drag us down with him." I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart. That had already been broken when I lost Martha. No, this was different. This was the shattering of illusions. The ripping away of a veil I hadn't even realized was there. As silently as I could, I backed away from the door frame, made my way out of the house and into my rusted Ford F-150, started the engine with trembling hands. Then I called Richard Wilson. "I'll take the job," I said without preamble when he answered. "But I have one condition." "Name it, Frank," Richard replied, relief evident in his voice. "Nobody knows. Not until I'm ready. Especially not your nephew." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Bradley's been making enemies all over the company. You wanting to surprise him doesn't shock me one bit. When can you start?" I looked back at my daughter's house, at the life I'd helped build for her through decades of backbreaking labor and sacrifice. "Monday," I said. "I'll start Monday." The Wilson Construction offices hadn't changed much in the 2 years since I'd left. Same faded blue carpet, same fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sickly, same coffee machine that produced a brew closer to motor oil than anything drinkable. But I had changed. As I sat in Richard's office early Monday morning, dressed in the only suit I owned, the one I'd worn to Martha's funeral, I felt like an imposter. My calloused hands looked wrong against the polished surface of Richard's desk. My weathered face seemed out of place, reflected in his office windows. "The company's in trouble, Frank," Richard said bluntly, passing me a stack of files. "Bradley's been mismanaging projects left and right. We've lost 3 major contracts in the past 6 months. Client complaints are through the roof. I flipped through the files, quickly identifying problems. Cost overruns, missed deadlines, substandard materials being substituted to cut corners. Jesus, Richard, I muttered. How did you let it get this bad? Richard's face flushed. Family, he said simply. My sister would have killed me if I fired her precious boy, but she's moved to Florida now, and I'm done watching Bradley run my father's company into the ground. He slid a contract across the desk. Executive Project Manager. Full authority over all ongoing and upcoming projects. The salary's more than fair. I glanced at the figure and nearly choked. It was 4 times what I'd made as a site foreman. There's something else you should know, Richard said, leaning forward. Bradley's been skimming, taking kickbacks from suppliers for using inferior materials. I can't prove it yet, but I know it's happening. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me. Somehow it still did. He's stealing from his own family. Richard's expression hardened. Bradley Coleman has always believed he deserves more than he earns. Always looking for shortcuts, never wanted to learn the business from the ground up like you and I did. I thought about Bradley's words. You've been useless your whole life. A blue-collar nobody who never amounted to anything. I'll need complete access, I said, signing the contract with a steady hand. And I want to review every project Bradley's been involved with personally. Richard nodded, looking relieved. You'll have an office down the hall. As far as anyone knows, you're a consultant I've brought in to help right the ship. Your real position stays between us until you say otherwise. I stood, extending my hand. I'll need a team I can trust. People who won't report back to Bradley. Take whoever you need, Richard said, shaking my hand firmly. Just fix this, Frank. Save my father's company. As I turned to leave, Richard added, For what it's worth, I tried to talk you up to Bradley when he first joined us. Told him he could learn a lot from you. Know what he said? I paused at the door, already knowing the answer wouldn't be pleasant. He said he had nothing to learn from a man who spent his life taking orders instead of giving them. Richard's smile was grim. I think it's time Bradley learned exactly what kind of man you really are. The first week was brutal. I worked 14-hour days, reviewing contracts, visiting job sites, meeting with clients who'd been burned by Bradley's mismanagement. I slept on the fold-out couch in my new office more nights than I slept in my own bed. I'd told Emma I'd found work with a small construction outfit doing estimates. Nothing she'd think to mention to Bradley. She seemed relieved, if not particularly interested in the details. Our relationship had grown distant since Martha died, since I'd retreated into grief and alcohol and silence, another failure to add to my growing list. By Friday, I'd assembled my team. Maya Rodriguez, a brilliant young project engineer who Bradley had repeatedly passed over for promotion. Tom Chen, a contracts specialist who'd nearly quit after Bradley dismissed his concerns about material substitutions. And Darius Williams, a site foreman who'd worked alongside me for nearly 20 years before I'd left. Frank Wilson is back in the building, Darius said with a wide grin when I approached him. He pulled me into a bone-crushing hug. About damn time. It's just Callahan now, I corrected him, returning the hug. Frank Callahan, external consultant. Darius raised an eyebrow. Playing it close to the chest, huh? This have anything to do with that prick Coleman? I smiled thinly. I need people I can trust. Darius. People who won't run to Bradley with every decision I make. Man's made himself plenty of enemies. Darius snorted. Won't be hard to find folks who'd rather work with you than him. By the end of the day, I had my core team assembled in my office. Door locked, blinds drawn. Here's the situation, I said, distributing copies of a report I'd compiled. Wilson Construction is failing. Projects are behind schedule. Materials are substandard. Clients are walking away. Bradley Coleman's leadership in action, Tom muttered, adjusting his glasses as he scanned the report. Maya looked up sharply. Is this about taking Bradley down? Because if so, I want in. I studied her face. Young, determined, with the kind of fire I recognized from my own early days. Why? I asked simply. 3 years I've worked here, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. 3 years of watching Bradley take credit for my work, of being passed over while men with half my qualifications get promoted. Last month he told me maybe I should focus on starting a family instead of chasing advancement. My jaw tightened. This isn't just about Bradley, I said carefully. This is about saving a company that employs over 100 people. But if Bradley's been breaking laws or company policies in the process, he has, Tom interjected, tapping a section of the report. These material substitutions violate building codes. And I've suspected for months he's taking kickbacks from Riverside suppliers. Darius nodded grimly. Man's cutting corners everywhere. Safety equipment, proper scaffolding, training programs. It's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt. I felt a cold resolve settling in my chest. This wasn't just about revenge for Bradley's cruel words anymore. This was about protecting people's livelihoods, their safety, their futures. Here's what we're going to do, I said, pulling out a fresh sheet of paper. We're going to document everything. Every code violation, every kickback, every instance of negligence or misconduct. And we're going to fix the problems along the way. Properly, by the book. And then? Maya asked. I met each of their gazes in turn. And then, when the time is right, we present our findings to Richard Wilson. What happens to Bradley after that is up to him. What I didn't say, what I kept locked in the wounded chamber of my heart, was that I wanted Bradley to know exactly who had exposed him. I wanted to see his face when he realized the useless father-in-law he'd dismissed had been the architect of his downfall. It wasn't noble, it wasn't forgiving, but after a lifetime of turning the other cheek, of sacrificing without recognition, of being taken for granted by the very people I'd broken my back to support, I was done being the bigger man. For once in my life, I wanted justice. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. I visited every active construction site, speaking with foremen and workers, identifying problems and implementing solutions. I met with disgruntled clients, promising to address their concerns personally. I reviewed supplier contracts, flagging suspicious patterns for further investigation. And all the while, I documented Bradley's misdeeds. The evidence mounted quickly: falsified inspection reports, unauthorized material substitutions, padded invoices, safety violations. Bradley, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to my presence within the company. When we occasionally passed in the hallway, he looked right through me, just another aging construction worker, invisible to his ambitious young eyes. It was during the third week that our paths directly crossed. I was inspecting the Riverside Heights project, a luxury condominium development that was 6 months behind schedule and nearly $2 million over budget, when Bradley's gleaming BMW pulled into the site parking lot. I was standing with Darius reviewing revised material orders when Bradley approached, his Italian leather shoes incongruous among the mud and gravel of the construction site. "Williams," he called sharply, "what's going on here? I didn't authorize these material changes." Darius straightened, his expression carefully neutral. "Just following the new protocols, Mr. Coleman. All material changes need to go through the quality assurance team now." Bradley's face flushed with anger. "What new protocols? I'm the project manager. Nothing changes without my approval." "Actually," I interjected mildly, "these changes were approved by Richard Wilson himself. The original materials specified in your plan didn't meet building code requirements for this type of structure." Bradley's gaze swung to me, his eyes narrowing as he tried to place my face. "And you are?" "Frank Callahan," I said, extending my hand. External consultant brought in to address some quality concerns. His handshake was limp, dismissive. "Well, Mr. Callahan, in the future any concern should be brought directly to me before changes are implemented." "Of course," I replied pleasantly, though in this case the violation was rather serious. The materials you specified could have resulted in structural failures within 5 years. Not to mention the potential legal liability for the company. Bradley's jaw tightened, a vein pulsing at his temple. "I've been running this project for over a year. I think I understand the requirements better than some consultant." The way he said the word made it clear what he really thought. Another useless old man past his prime. "Perhaps," I said, my voice still mild. But the building inspector disagreed. Quite strongly, in fact. "You can review his report if you'd like." For a moment, I thought Bradley might explode. Then, visibly collecting himself, he forced a tight smile. "I'll take a look. Williams, I need a word. In private." As Bradley led Darius away, I turned back to my inspection, a small, grim satisfaction settling in my chest. It wasn't much, just a minor confrontation, but it was a start. Later that afternoon, Darius called me. "Bradley's on the warpath," he reported. "Started asking questions about you. Wanted to know who hired you, what your background is." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing he couldn't find out himself. That you're a consultant with decades of experience. That Richard brought you in to address quality issues." Darius paused. "He made a call afterward. To Emma." My stomach tightened. He'll figure it out eventually. Maybe sooner than you think, Darius replied. Word is he's called an emergency meeting with all the project managers tomorrow. Sounds like he's planning to assert his authority. I hung up and leaned back in my office chair, considering my options. I wasn't ready for a direct confrontation with Bradley, not yet. I needed more evidence, more time to implement changes that would save the company. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Dad, are you really working at Wilson Construction? Brad seems upset. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The truth would lead to questions I wasn't prepared to answer. A lie would only complicate things further. Finally, I typed, yes, as a consultant. Richard hired me to help with some projects. We can talk about it this weekend. Her response came almost immediately. Brad says you're undermining him. He's really angry, Dad. I felt a flare of indignation. After everything he'd said about me, after the contempt he'd shown, he had the nerve to complain to my daughter. Taking a deep breath, I replied, I'm just doing the job I was hired to do. We'll sort it out. I set the phone down and pulled out the file I'd been compiling on Bradley's activities. It was substantial already, but not yet conclusive. I needed more, needed to understand the full scope of his misdeeds before I made my move. The next morning I arrived at the office before dawn, determined to avoid the meeting Bradley had called. Instead, I headed directly to the Parkview Estates site, another troubled project under Bradley's management, to continue my investigation. By mid-morning, my phone was buzzing constantly with messages from Maya and Tom, reporting on Bradley's meeting. He's on a rampage, Maya texted. Says all consultant recommendations need his personal approval going forward. Says you in particular are to be kept away from his projects. Tom's message was more concerning. He's ordered all the original materials reinstated on Riverside Heights. Says the budget can't accommodate the changes. This is dangerous, Frank. I called Richard immediately, explaining the situation. He can't override safety requirements, Richard said, his voice tight with anger. I'll put a stop to it. No, I replied. Let him do it, document it. This is exactly the kind of evidence we need. Evidence? Richard sounded confused. Frank, I didn't hire you to build a case against my nephew. I hired you to fix the company. Sometimes fixing means removing what's broken, I said quietly. Bradley is breaking laws, Richard. Taking kickbacks, endangering workers and future residents. This goes beyond family loyalty now. There was a long silence on the line. Then, do what you need to do, but keep me informed every step of the way. By the time I returned to the office that afternoon, Bradley had left for the day. But the atmosphere was tense, with employees speaking in hushed tones, shooting nervous glances my way. Maya caught up with me in the hallway. Bradley's told everyone you're trying to sabotage him, she whispered. Says you're a washed-up has-been who resents his success. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt oddly calm. Let him think that, I said. It'll make what comes next even more satisfying. Maya studied my face. There's something personal between you two, isn't there? This isn't just about the company. I hesitated, then nodded slightly. He's married to my daughter. Her eyes widened. Does he know who you are? Not yet, I said. But he will. Soon enough. The confrontation came sooner than I'd anticipated. That weekend when I arrived at Emma's house for our regular Sunday dinner, a tradition I'd maintained even through the darkest days of my grief, Bradley was waiting. Well, he said, leaning against the kitchen counter as I entered. If it isn't Richard's pet consultant. Emma looked between us, confusion evident on her face. You two have met? Oh, we've met, Bradley said, his voice hard. Your father has been quite busy at Wilson Construction, undermining my authority, changing my material orders, questioning my decisions with clients. I set down the bottle of wine I'd brought, keeping my voice level. I've been doing the job Richard hired me to do, ensuring projects meet code requirements and quality standards. Dad, Emma interjected, you never said you were working directly with Brad's projects. I didn't know I was, I replied, which was technically true. When I'd taken the job, I hadn't known which projects were Bradley's, though I'd quickly discovered it was the troubled ones. Richard asked me to review certain sites that had quality concerns. Bradley's laugh was brittle. Quality concerns, that's rich. My projects were running just fine until you started poking around. Were they? I asked quietly. The Riverside Heights development is 6 months behind schedule. The Parkview Estates project has failed 3 safety inspections. The Turner office complex is $1.5 million over budget. Emma's eyes widened. Brad, is that true? He's exaggerating. Bradley dismissed with a wave. Construction has delays, it's normal. What isn't normal is an old man who can barely use a computer second-guessing decisions made by professionals with actual management experience. The barb struck its target, but I kept my expression neutral. The building inspector's reports aren't exaggerations, Bradley. Neither are the client complaints or the supplier invoices that don't match the materials actually delivered to sites. Bradley stepped closer, his face flushing. You're out of your depth, old man. You think because Richard threw you a bone, you suddenly understand how modern construction management works. You spent your life taking orders, not giving them. Brad, Emma exclaimed, shock evident in her voice. That's enough. But Bradley wasn't finished. His next words came out in a contemptuous hiss. You've been useless your whole life. A blue-collar nobody who never amounted to anything. And now you think you can waltz in and tell me how to do my job? Go back to your cheap whiskey and your pathetic grief. At least there, you were only destroying yourself. The kitchen fell silent. Emma's face had gone pale, her hand pressed to her mouth. I should have been angry. Should have shouted back, defended myself, told Bradley exactly who he was really dealing with. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, because in that moment, with those cruel words hanging in the air, Bradley had sealed his own fate. I think, I said quietly, I should go. Dad. No, Emma protested, reaching for me. Brad didn't mean. He meant every word. I interrupted, my voice still level. And he's entitled to his opinion. I turned to Bradley, meeting his gaze directly. We'll continue this discussion at work, Mr. Coleman. As I walked out the door, I heard Emma's raised voice behind me, demanding explanations from her husband. But I didn't turn back. Instead, I called Maya. It's time, I said when she answered. Monday morning, I need everything we've got. Every document. Every piece of evidence. Bradley just forced our hand. Monday dawned clear and cold, a crisp October morning in Boston. I arrived at Wilson Construction at 6 a.m., well before most employees would be in. Maya, Tom, and Darius were already waiting in my office. Boxes of documents stacked on the conference table. Everything's here, Maya said, gesturing to the meticulously organized evidence. Falsified inspection reports, kickback documentation, safety violations, contract breaches. It's all organized by project and date. Tom pushed his glasses up his nose, looking nervous. This is going to cause an earthquake, Frank. Bradley has allies in the company. Not as many as he thinks, Darius countered. Most of the site workers hate the guy. He treats them like they're disposable. I nodded, reviewing the executive summary Maya had prepared. It was damning. Richard needs to see this first, I decided. All of it, before we do anything else. Richard arrived at 7:30, looking grim when he saw the assembled team and stacks of evidence. That bad? He asked, settling heavily into a chair. Worse, I replied, sliding the summary across to him. Bradley hasn't just been cutting corners or taking kickbacks. He's been systematically defrauding the company and endangering lives in the process. For the next hour, we walked Richard through the evidence. Falsified material certifications that could lead to structural failures. Kickbacks from suppliers documented through a shell company Bradley had set up. Safety violations that had been covered up with bribes to inspectors. By the time we finished, Richard looked physically ill. My sister's son, he murmured, shaking his head. My own blood. It's not just fraud, Maya pointed out gently. These violations could result in injuries or deaths if they're not addressed. We're talking about criminal negligence. Richard straightened, his expression hardening. What do you recommend, Frank? I'd been considering this question for weeks. We bring in the company's legal counsel this morning, share everything we found, then we call an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. And Bradley, we call him into the board meeting, I said. Present the evidence. Give him a chance to explain himself, though I doubt he'll have any explanation that could justify this level of misconduct. Richard nodded slowly. He'll be terminated, possibly face criminal charges. Yes, I agreed. It's the only way forward if you want to save the company. And your role in all this? Richard asked, studying me carefully. Do you want Bradley to know who brought him down? The question gave me pause. Part of me, the wounded, angry part that had listened to Bradley call me useless and worthless, wanted nothing more than to see the look on his face when he realized who I really was. But another part, the part that still loved my daughter, that still valued integrity over vengeance, hesitated. Let's focus on the company first, I said finally. My personal history with Bradley is secondary. Richard looked skeptical but nodded. I'll call legal. Be in my office at 1 o'clock for the preliminary meeting. Board members will convene at 3. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Legal counsel arrived, grim-faced as they reviewed our evidence. Additional documents were gathered. Security protocols were quietly updated, with Bradley's access to sensitive systems restricted. At 12:30, I stepped outside for some air, trying to calm my racing heart. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, what's going on?" Brad got called into an emergency board meeting. He's panicking. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The truth would devastate her, but lies had already done enough damage to our family. "I'm sorry, Emma," I finally typed. "It's complicated. I can explain everything tonight. Please trust me." Her response was immediate. "Are you behind this?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of decades of sacrifice and love and complicated family dynamics pressing down on me. "Yes," I replied simply. "But there are reasons. Good ones." No response came. I pocketed my phone and headed back inside, steeling myself for what was to come. The preliminary meeting with legal counsel was thorough and methodical. Our evidence was deemed substantial and concerning by the company's attorneys, who recommended immediate termination of Bradley's employment and possible referral to law enforcement. At precisely 3 p.m., we entered the boardroom. Richard, myself, Maya, Tom, legal counsel, and 5 board members. Bradley was scheduled to arrive at 3:15, giving us time to brief the board on our findings. At 3:14, the boardroom door burst open. Bradley stormed in, his face contorted with rage, Emma following close behind him looking distraught. "What the hell is this?" Bradley demanded, slamming his hand on the table. "An ambush? And with him?" He jabbed a finger in my direction. "The has-been consultant who's had it out for me from day one?" Richard stood, his voice measured. "Bradley, this meeting was called to address serious concerns about your management of company projects. Please have a seat." "I don't need to sit," Bradley spat. "This is a witch hunt, and I know exactly who's behind it." He turned to me, eyes blazing. "You couldn't stand that I was successful, could you? That I achieved more in 5 years than you did in 40. So you set out to sabotage me." Emma stepped forward, her eyes darting between us. "Dad, please. Whatever this is about, can't we discuss it privately, as a family?" "This isn't about family, Emma," I said gently. "This is about professional misconduct. Serious misconduct that has put the company and people's safety at risk." "Bullshit," Bradley shouted. "This is personal. You've hated me from day one because I saw through your blue-collar martyr act. Because I wasn't impressed by your sob stories about working double shifts and taking second mortgages." Richard cleared his throat. "Bradley, enough. We have documented evidence of contract violations, kickbacks from suppliers, falsified inspection reports. Evidence he manufactured," Bradley interjected, pointing at me again. "Ask yourself, Uncle Richard, why would a so-called consultant focus exclusively on my projects? Why would he spend weeks building a case against me instead of actually improving company operations?" "Frank has been addressing quality issues across all projects," Richard corrected. "The fact that most of those issues were concentrated in your projects is concerning in itself." Bradley laughed bitterly. "Frank, we're on a first-name basis now? Tell them, Frank. Tell them who you really are. Tell them about your personal vendetta against me." All eyes in the room turned to me. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. "My name is Frank Callahan," I began quietly. "I worked for Wilson Construction for 40 years, starting as a laborer and eventually becoming a site foreman. I left 2 years ago after my wife died from cancer." I turned to face the board members directly. "Yes, Bradley Coleman is married to my daughter. And yes, I've heard his opinion of me quite clearly. He believes I've been useless my whole life. A blue-collar nobody who never amounted to anything." Emma made a small, pained sound, but I continued. "But my personal history with Bradley is irrelevant to the evidence before you. These documents," I gestured to the stacks of papers on the table, "aren't fabrications. They're records of systematic fraud, negligence, and misconduct. They stand on their own merits, regardless of who compiled them." "This is absurd," Bradley scoffed, though I could see uncertainty creeping into his expression. "You're all going to take the word of a washed-up construction worker over a Harvard Business School graduate?" "We're taking the word of the evidence," Richard said firmly. "Falsified inspection reports, kickbacks documented through your shell company, BC Enterprises, substitution of substandard materials that violate building codes." "And what about my position?" Bradley demanded, a note of desperation entering his voice. Executive project manager? Are you firing me based on the say-so of a glorified laborer? Richard's expression was stone. No, Bradley. We're firing you based on the recommendation of our new executive project manager, Frank Callahan. The room went silent. Bradley stared at me, comprehension slowly dawning on his face. You... what? I hired Frank 3 weeks ago to replace you, Richard explained. He's been assessing the damage and implementing corrections while we gathered evidence of your misconduct. Bradley turned to me, his face ashen. You're my replacement? You? I nodded once, feeling no triumph in the moment, only sadness for what this would mean for Emma. You've been useless your whole life, Bradley had said. He had no idea I was his new boss, but now he knew, and the knowledge seemed to crush him more thoroughly than any evidence of his wrongdoing could have. Bradley sank into a chair, all bravado evaporating. This is a mistake, he said weakly. I can explain everything. But as legal counsel began methodically presenting the evidence, document by damning document, it became clear there was no explanation that could save him. Emma remained standing by the door, tears streaming silently down her face as she witnessed her husband's disgrace. When our eyes met across the room, I saw not anger, but a profound sadness, and something else, recognition, as if she were truly seeing me, the man I was, not the failure Bradley had portrayed for the first time in years. By the end of the meeting, Bradley's employment was terminated, his company access revoked, and a referral to the district attorney's office approved by the board. He was escorted from the building by security, Emma following mutely behind him. As the boardroom emptied, Richard approached me. Not quite how you imagined this playing out, I suspect, he said quietly. No, I admitted, but necessary nonetheless. Will your daughter ever forgive you? I gazed out the window at the Boston skyline, buildings I'd helped construct dotting the horizon. I don't know, I said honestly, but I couldn't keep letting him risk people's lives to line his pockets. Couldn't keep watching him destroy your father's company. Some lines you don't cross even for family. Richard clasped my shoulder. The company announcement goes out tomorrow. Executive Project Manager Frank Callahan at the helm of all major projects. A lot of work ahead to fix what Bradley broke. I nodded, already mentally cataloging the priorities: remediation of safety issues, renegotiation of contracts, rebuilding client trust. One day at a time, I said. One project at a time. It's how I've always worked. Emma didn't call that night, or the next day, or the day after that. I left messages, sent texts, but received no response. The silence was painful but not surprising. I'd exposed her husband as a fraud and a criminal, had cost him his career, his reputation, possibly even his freedom if charges were filed. I threw myself into work instead, focusing on saving the company that had been my home for most of my adult life. Days stretched into weeks as I implemented systemic changes, rebuilt client relationships, and ensured every project met or exceeded safety standards. A month after Bradley's termination, the doorbell rang at my modest Dorchester home. I opened it to find Emma standing on my porch looking exhausted and older than her 35 years. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside wordlessly, heart hammering in my chest. She entered slowly, looking around at the house she'd grown up in, the house her mother and I had purchased when Emma was just a baby, the house Bradley had called Dumpy, but that contained a lifetime of memories. "Bradley's been charged," she said without preamble, settling onto the worn sofa. "Wire fraud, contract fraud, criminal negligence. His lawyer says he'll likely serve time." I nodded, uncertain what response she wanted from me. "I'm sorry it came to that," I said finally. "Are you?" Her gaze was direct, challenging. "Are you really sorry, Dad?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm sorry for the pain it's caused you," I said honestly. "But no, I'm not sorry he's facing consequences for actions that could have gotten people killed, for stealing from the company, for breaking laws he knew better than to break." Emma nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something she already knew. "He's filing for divorce," she said. "Says he can't forgive me for being related to the man who destroyed him." The news hit like a physical blow. "Emma, I never wanted—" "It's not your fault," she interrupted, raising a hand. "The marriage was already in trouble. Had been for a while. She paused, seemingly struggling with her next words. "I just didn't see him clearly. Didn't want to see. We rarely want to see the flaws in the people we love. I said gently. She looked up then, tears brimming in her eyes. Like I didn't see you? Really see you? All these years? I swallowed hard. Emma, no, let me finish, she insisted. After Mom died when you were struggling, I believed what Bradley said about you, that you were choosing to give up, that you were wallowing, that you'd never been anything more than a blue-collar worker who got lucky enough to marry Mom. The admission stung, but I remained silent, letting her speak. But then I found Mom's journals, Emma continued. She wrote about everything, Dad. About how you worked double shifts for years to put me through college. About the second mortgage you took out when I needed help with my down payment. About how you turned down that management position at Roberts Construction because it would have meant moving away from us. Her voice broke. She wrote about how you were the strongest, most selfless man she'd ever known. How your hands might be calloused from physical labor, but your heart was gentle. How you built our life brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, without ever complaining. Tears burned in my eyes as memories of Martha flooded back. My beautiful, perceptive wife who'd seen me, truly seen me when no one else had. I was so blind, Emma whispered. So caught up in Bradley's world of status and appearances that I forgot what real strength looks like. She reached for my hand, my weathered, work-worn hand. I forgot what you taught me. And what's that? I asked hoarsely. That true worth isn't measured in titles or salaries, it's measured in integrity, in showing up day after day for the people you love. She squeezed my hand. In building something that lasts, even if no one sees your name on the cornerstone. We sat in silence for a long moment, years of misunderstandings and unspoken words hanging between us. Can you forgive me? Emma finally asked. I pulled her into my arms. This child I would have died for 1,000 times over. There's nothing to forgive, I murmured against her hair. Nothing at all. 6 months later, I stood on the Riverside Heights rooftop, surveying the completed project. What had once been Bradley's failure was now a success story, delivered on time, under budget, with quality that exceeded client expectations. Emma had joined me for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, proudly watching as I addressed the gathered crowd of clients, workers, and company executives. Her divorce from Bradley had been finalized the previous month, around the same time he'd accepted a plea deal for reduced charges. It's beautiful, she said now, joining me at the rooftop's edge as the sunset painted the Boston skyline in hues of gold and amber. You did this. We did this, I corrected, gesturing to the team that had worked alongside me for months. No one builds anything worthwhile alone. She smiled, linking her arm through mine. Mom would be so proud of you, Dad. Not just for saving the company, but for standing up for what's right. Even when it was hard. Even when it hurt. I thought about Martha then. About her strength through the cancer. Her grace even when facing death. About how she'd always believed in me. Even when I doubted myself. Your mother taught me that you can't control what life throws at you, I said quietly. You can only control how you respond. With integrity or without it. Emma nodded, resting her head against my shoulder as we watched the last rays of sunlight glint off the windows of the buildings I'd helped construct throughout my career. Buildings that would stand long after I was gone. A legacy written not in my name, but in solid foundations and true plumb lines. Bradley had called me useless, had dismissed a lifetime of honest work as nothing, had never understood that true worth isn't measured in corner offices or luxury cars, but in the lives you touch, the difference you make, the integrity you maintain even when no one is watching. As I stood there with my daughter, surveying the city I'd helped build one project at a time, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. Martha was gone, but her love remained. My working days would eventually end, but what I'd built would stand. And Emma, my greatest project, my most precious achievement, was by my side again, seeing me clearly at last. Ready to go home? Emma asked as darkness began to fall. Yes, I said, turning away from the view. I'm ready. And as we walked away together, I knew with certainty that I had never been useless. Not for a single day of my life. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.